Now it's my pleasure and I'm so proud to introduce Dan Mariaschin, who has traveled to Australia several times. So some of us have met him personally, and we know that he is a master of knowledge of all things related to the Jewish world. And I'm so proud to be introducing him. So, B'nai B'rith CEO Daniel Mariaschin was raised in Swansea, New Hampshire, where he acquired a pride in his heritage in a town where only 4 Jewish families lived, going on to earn degrees at the University of New Hampshire and Brandeis University. Mr. Mariaschin put his commitments into action, working tirelessly for the Jewish people's most important causes, including the safeguarding of their civil rights, and for people everywhere, advancing relations for the State of Israel, preserving the memory of the Shoah through educational and other programs, and procuring restitution for its survivors. B'nai B'rith's top executive for the past 22 years, Mr. Mariaschin directs and supervises B'nai B'rith programs, activities, and staff around the world. He also serves as director of B'nai B'rith International Center for Human Rights and Public Policy. In his dual capacity, he presents B'nai B'rith's views and analysis to world leaders, international forums, and conferences, the US Congress and the media, and coordinates B'nai B'rith programs and policies on issues of concern to the Jewish community and Israel. Additionally, he supervises B'nai B'rith's other foci, affordable senior housing and issues related to older adults, plus disaster relief and humanitarian assistance. Mr. Mariaschin participated in negotiations with the government of Lithuania that resulted in the transfer and distribution of Torah scrolls from Holocaust-ravaged locations into Israel and Jewish diaspora communities. Through his efforts, the first edition of the Diary of Anna Frank was translated into Lithuanian. He also served with the Elie Wiesel Commission, which researched and produced a study of the Holocaust in Romania. Mr. Mariaschin's expert analysis on a myriad of topics have appeared in numerous publications, including the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. During a career which spans more than 4 decades, his numerous accomplishments have been recognized by governments and prominent institutions worldwide. In 2015, Mr. Mariaschin was included as one of the Allgemeiner's list of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life. Honored by his alma mater, he holds an honorary doctorate of humane letters from the University of New Hampshire and Brandeis University. Brandeis University has chosen him as the recipient of the American Jewish Communal Leadership Award. Please welcome Dan Mariaschin.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. The presentation will be shorter than the introduction, I assure you. First of all, I got one of these alerts on my phone, and sure enough, there's a big thunderstorm out there right now. So if you hear a little background music, you'll know exactly what that is. It's great to be back in Australia. I have visited a couple of times, and it was good. I mentioned Ivan before, and I see Jim Altman is on, Henry Worth. I'm sure there are others that I'm missing. Anna, we answered with alacrity because you asked us, and because both of us have been to Australia, but more importantly, because we know of the work that all of you do. And Chuck really laid all of it out so well. And I was thinking, as he talked about the Einfeld Unit, how much you represent what B'nai B'rith is all about. It's the mission that was set out 178 years ago. And you practice it. And it is, I think, in Jewish life, it is unique. The B'nai B'rith mission, the B'nai B'rith experience is a unique one. Working in the community on so many different issues, helping those in need, and so many other projects. So you have a lot to be proud of, and really it's a privilege to be able to join you, I'm going to say this evening, but this afternoon. Anna's asked me to talk a little about anti-Semitism, what we're doing at the United Nations, and some other issues. Let me just begin by saying, with regard to anti-Semitism, that this is, in my adult life, I've never seen as dire a situation as we have today. It's been called a perfect storm from the left, anti-Semitism from the right, from the Islamists. It's coming at us from all sides. And the difference between what we're experiencing today and what we've experienced over the millennia is that we're living in the age of the internet, and we're living in the age of social media. And the ability to have a multiplier effect, to engage in anti-Semitic rhetoric, not to mention violent activity, but to engage in anti-Semitic rhetoric, to spew lies, misinformation, disinformation about Israel. And so much of contemporary anti-Semitism today centers on Israel. We've never experienced this before. And let me just give you a little bit of a timeline. In 1975, that's only 46 years ago, in 1975, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Zionism equals racism resolution. And at the time, it was considered to be a terrible setback for Israel and an advance, if you will, if I can use that word, for the anti-Semites. And a number of nations broke diplomatic relations with Israel, and the Palestinians, of course, seized on it. That time, the PLO and others, the Arab League, and it was considered really to be a serious blow. 15 years later, 16 years later, in 1991, that resolution was repealed at the UN's unusual case where it was repealed, but the damage had already been done. But in 1991, we were just getting into the internet age, and we did not have social media. We didn't have Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, et cetera. But today we do. And that means that our problems and the challenges that we face and the threats that we face are global, and they're not just localized. And I would include right here in the United States, you've read about it, you've seen it. We've had a tremendous outbreak of anti-Semitism. You saw during the fighting in Gaza not too long ago, a few months ago, where diners eating outside in Los Angeles and in New York were beaten by mobs running through Jewish neighborhoods, marching through Jewish neighborhoods, demanding to know whether the diners were Jewish. I mean, I'm not comparing to the 1930s because it wouldn't be fair to compare to the 1930s. It's a unique period. But there are certain things that resonate from that period. And if you're eating at a restaurant in Los Angeles in a Jewish neighborhood and a mob comes down the street demanding to know whether or not you're Jewish, they weren't necessarily carrying torches, but they could have been, and it could have been, it could have been Munich, or it could have been any other city in the 1930s. This is something new. We fought very hard in this country against anti-Semitism for many, many years. It's always been here. Jews couldn't go to certain hotels and resorts. Jews couldn't have admission to certain universities above a certain quota. There were certain businesses, the advertising business or the insurance business or banking, where Jews couldn't get jobs or get good jobs. And we fought very hard against that, not only for ourselves, we fought for others as well, to remove discriminatory practices. And we've emerged from that period, but now we're in a much more difficult period. I mentioned the United States, not only because I'm living here, but because of some of the shocking events that have happened here. We have members of Congress, and you've read about it, who have zeroed in on Israel and on those who support Israel. We have one member of Congress, you remember, her name is Ilhan Omar. She's from Minnesota. She's a Somali refugee who found haven in the United States and went to Minnesota. Now she's a member of Congress. And you remember she was talking about Jewish influence in Washington, and she said it was all about the Benjamins. Benjamin Franklin is on the $100 bill. Jewish money. Again, classic anti-Semitic trope. She and Rashida Tlaib is another member of Congress, a Palestinian who is from Michigan. We're questioning our loyalty to the United States, the dual loyalty issue. We owe more allegiance to a foreign power, to a foreign country, in the case of the state of Israel. And then we had the fighting in Gaza, and another member of Congress said that Israel, that particular group, said that Israel was engaging in state terror. Another one said that Israel's an apartheid state. Well, I could go on, and this shows the extent to the problem here, not to mention the problems that we have in Europe, in Germany, in France, in Belgium. Let's talk about something that's not Israel related. I mentioned Belgium, Finland. There are those who are out there threatening to deny us the right to Brit Milah and Shechita. There are movements out there. There's legislation out there. There are countries, democratic countries, that are seeking to take from us our religious freedom. Now, these are animal rights folks, and they're, that you can, some people explain it away that way. But what about religious freedom? What could be more important than that? And we're experiencing that now in Europe. I've followed what's been going on in Australia, and I know there's hardly a day that passes that you haven't experienced in Australia some act from the left or the right of anti-Semitism. So what we're really talking about is a global phenomenon. Now, B'nai B'rith, as we all know, was present at the founding of the United Nations in 1945. We received our first credentials as non-governmental organizations in 1947. And since then, B'nai B'rith has been very active in the UN in advocating for the state of Israel. The UN, not just since 1975, Israel has had serious problems at the UN since it came into that organization in 1949. But the agencies we talked about the General Assembly and the Zionism equals racism resolution. UNESCO, which had the resolutions a few years ago relating to the Temple Mount, where the official name of the Temple Mount has been changed inside the UN. They use, the preferred term is Haram al-Sharif. This is the preferred term. A Temple Mount, it always, I've told diplomats this, forget about us for a second. It's the holiest place, it's our holiest place. This is the site of the temple. But forget about us for a second. What about Christians? This is where Jesus walked. And countries like France, which is a Roman Catholic majority country, voted for a resolution that changed the name of the Temple Mount to Haram al-Sharif. Now, I'm not denying we shouldn't deny the Muslim connection to the place. But the fact that this was kind of cavalierly changed shows where the UN is going on these issues. In the Human Rights Council, every year, Human Rights Council in Geneva, where we go every year until COVID. We went to Paris, to UNESCO, to have meetings, gone to Geneva. In the Human Rights Council, every year, the only country that gets one item dedicated to being castigated and harshly criticized is the state of Israel. It's called item 7. And it's a basket, actually, of resolutions relating to the Golan Heights, relating to human rights activities in the territories. Anyway, it's all anti-Israel. The Human Rights Council issued a blacklist of countries, of companies, mainly Israeli, that are doing business in the territories, reminiscent of the Ben and Jerry's situation of just a few weeks ago. So the United Nations is a place where we continue to fight contemporary anti-Semitism. Now, I mentioned the United Nations because coming up at the end of this month is the 20th anniversary of the Durban Conference on Racism. The Durban Conference on Racism, you remember, was held in Durban, South Africa. It turned into a terrible hate fest against Israel and against Jews. Delegates were jostled, demonstrations every day. There was a meeting of the member states of the UN in Durban. Then there was a side meeting of NGOs, and the NGO meeting was worse than the one of the delegates. It was really a tremendous hate fest. And we, B'nai B'rith, actually, Richard Heidemann, Chuck's predecessor by a few presidents of B'nai B'rith, led the Jewish delegations to the Durban meeting. And Richard led a walkout of the Jewish organizations from that meeting. That meeting in 2001, which was just before 9/11, or just before, that meeting and the rhetoric used by the anti-Semites, but the pro-Palestinian groups, really is the language which is used today. The move toward BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, that all came out of Durban. The charge of Israel being an apartheid state all came out of Durban. And so we are going to have, at the end of this month, to note I don't say commemorate, to note that terrible meeting of 20 years ago. We are putting together, in fact, I'm going up actually tomorrow, which is one of the reasons why I think I'm going to leave your meeting a little bit early tonight. We are going to have a televised program. We're working together with a group called the Jewish Broadcasting Service. And there will be a program packaged with very important speakers like Natan Sharansky and Bernard-Henri Levy, and a whole range of other speakers. Chuck will be one of the speakers as well. And we're going to post it, make sure that everybody has a chance to watch it. Now, what are we doing about anti-Semitism? Well, that's one thing. We have a dedicated page on our website called None Shall Be Afraid, which talks about anti-Semitism. We engage in a number of programs under the name of None Shall Be Afraid. We've done webinars. We've worked together with other Jewish organizations as well in battling anti-Semitism. Chuck referenced the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA, and its working definition of anti-Semitism. Very important. And we are promoting that definition all the time. I have to believe that Australia, I should have checked this, that Australia has adopted it. I would be surprised if it hadn't. But there are a lot of countries that have not adopted that working definition. And that definition gets to the point that we're fighting today with contemporary anti-Semitism. where it crosses the line, where Israel is accused of being an apartheid state, where Israel is accused of all kinds of terrible crimes. And it is important that country after country adopt this particular resolution. I would say one other thing. There we go.
Oh,
that's good. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you. That's great. That's great. I'm not yet adept at screen sharing, so I thank Chuck for that. By the way, we are encouraging countries not to show up. There's going to be a Durban review in September, a Durban review conference inviting all the countries to the UN to have this will be the 4th Durban conference. We're telling countries not to go because it will be yet another opportunity for the anti-Semites to engage in their activity. Unfortunately, not many countries. France the other day said it was not going. I'm not sure. I think we're up to about 12 countries that have said they're not going, but that's 12 countries out of 194. So we really need to do more. So this is really what we're doing, what we're engaged in. We take it very seriously. B'nai B'rith, for much of its history, has engaged. There we go. Just to mute. B'nai B'rith, for much of its history, has really been in the forefront of fighting anti-Semitism, in the forefront of advocating for the state of Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. People don't realize exactly not only how democratic Israel is. We know it has this fractious political system, but it's healthy and it's a democratic system. The number of an Arab party actually is part of this particular government, an Arab Israeli party, Palestinian party. Women hold important positions throughout Israel's government. On the LGBTQ front, I mean, Israel, we all know it's one of the leaders, and yet it continues to be maligned. And it not only continues to be maligned, but it continues to be threatened, not only by a couple of its neighbors to the north, but especially by the Iranians and the Iranian nuclear program, the new leadership of Iran, this election of Ebrahim Raisi, who is known as the hanging judge, is the new president of Iran. We have spoken out against any negotiation with the Iranians. They can't be trusted. We believe that sanctions should remain in place against Iran. Its malign behavior in the region, forgetting about the nuclear program. Its malign behavior in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, its support and transfer of weapons, rockets to Hamas. It's in Yemen. Iran is the main threat to peace in the region and certainly the threat to the state of Israel. So with all of that, we're fighting back against those who dismiss that and who seek to simply continue to malign, demonize, and delegitimize the state of Israel. So let me finish just by saying we value the work that you do. We're very proud of the work that you do. There isn't a speech that I give or that Chuck gives where we don't mention that we are in Australia. It's very important. It's important for us to say that because it shows the global representation of our organization, but it also speaks to all that important work over 25 years in the case of the Einfeld Lodge that Chuck has talked about, all of the important work that we do in the community, for our community, for Jews and for non-Jews, every day in some part of the world. Today it may be in Australia, but it's everywhere. And seriously, we are deeply appreciative for all that you do. So Anna, again, thank you for the invitation. We wish you all well as you enter the 26th year of the unit's very active existence, and look forward to working with you going forward. Thank you. And Shana Tova to each of you.
Indeed. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for that most informative and always balanced view that you give us, and the important work that B'nai B'rith International does. And I think every single one of us in B'nai B'rith are proud to belong to such a fantastic organization that fights for Jewish rights and for Israel, for assistance. I saw there was another earthquake in Haiti. I'm expecting, you'll probably be sending assistance there, as you did to in Florida when that apartment collapsed. So we can all take great pride in being members of this fantastic organization. And I can't remember, more than 25 years I've been a member, and now I'm still proud to belong. And I want to thank you for staying up so late and for your always wise words. So thank you. And Chuck, thank you for being with us this afternoon to celebrate our 25th anniversary. Thank you.
Thanks to everybody.
Shana Tova.